to another exciting episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Wes Bryan, and in today's episode, we're coming back at you with more VMware. That's right, VMware Certified Professional version 6. In a previous episode, we were talking about snapshots, and one of the last things that Don mentioned is it's not a viable solution to protect your information. So continuing that theory, we're talking about data protection today. Joining me in the studios is none other than Don himself. Don, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Wes. Thanks for having me back. And yeah, diving right back into the world of data protection. Now, I did say, the snapshots are not a replacement for a backup solution. So we've got to have something in place to back up our virtual machines. And a lot of you probably already do. You've probably got something like ArcServe or Semantic Backup Exec, Commvault. The list goes on and on of products that are out there, Acronis TrueImage, whatever, that you're using to back up your machines. Heck, maybe you just use Windows Backup or what's the other one? The System Center Data Protection Manager. You got Bacula, the open source ones. You got all those different ones. They all work great, and they all work perfectly fine, and you can certainly use them to back up your virtual machines. They do a wonderful job, all right? But VMware also happens to have a product too. And so if you don't have a backup solution in place and you're looking for one that's out there, VMware has what's called the vSphere, or VMware Data Protection, so VDP. And VDP, it's a product that VMware actually didn't make. EMC made it, so they kind of partnered with EMC to create this product. So the big advantage of it is not that it's written by VMware, but the big advantage is that it is integrated into vSphere. That if we choose to deploy VDP, it integrates into vSphere and we have one place to go to be able to manage this and get it set up. So it's a neat solution to have. You can quickly get it deployed and you start backing up your virtual machines using it. So that's what we're going to take a look at right here in this episode.
So Don, when we think about VDP like you're talking about, is there a place that we can go if we need information, if we were going to implement this in our infrastructure? Do we have something that we can reference?
Yeah, I'll put the links in the show notes, but VMware, they've got several product pages and stuff that describe it. They're kind of light on the details, though. Fortunately, it's really easy to get a demo copy from them, and you can throw it in and experiment around with it. When we deploy VDP, it's super easy because they give us an OVF template, right? Just a virtual machine appliance. And so you just download it and import it right in. It's a virtual machine, and it's already set up. It runs, I believe it's SUSE Linux, and it just fires up and it does its job, and you can use it. You can have it up and running in a matter of moments, even in a demo type period. So really easy to try it out and get it configured. Now, a couple of little requirements that we need to be aware of. If we're going to deploy this, it is a virtual machine. It does need its own resources. So it has certain limitations and restrictions, but basically when we deploy it, it needs a minimum of 2 CPUs and a minimum of 4 gigs of RAM. Okay, so you got to have that available. Now, when I say minimum, I really mean minimum. If you're going to be backing up a large quantity of virtual machines with this thing, you're probably going to want more. And VMware recommends 4 CPUs. That's kind of one of their things that they hit on. And on the memory, they don't necessarily have a recommendation on that. It's basically the more VMs you back up, the more memory you're going to need to add to it. Also keep in mind that you might need more than one VDP server. That a single VDP server can only do so much, right? Because it's got to reach out to the virtual machine, it's got to back up their data, it's got to store it in a data store. So it's doing a lot of work. And so VMware recommends that you try and put a limit in place of 400 VMs. So we don't want to back up more than 400 VMs with one VDP server. If I have more than 400 VMs, I'm having a hard time with my numbers today. If we have more than 400 VMs, then we need more than one VDP server to cover that.
And Don, when it comes to backing up data, that's going to take storage, I can only assume, so I'm sure there's probably a recommendation on storage there as well, right?
Yeah, your storage, it needs to be equal to what you're going to be backing up. Not exactly equal, because it does some neat stuff. When we do a backup, it doesn't just take the VMDK. It doesn't take the virtual disk and just copy it and that's it, right? So I might have a 50 gig virtual disk, and when I back it up, it may actually end up being much, much smaller because it does compression and it does data deduplication. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say that I've got 10 web servers that are all running CentOS 7, right? So I've got all these Linux servers fired up. They're all running CentOS 7. They've all got Apache on them, and they've got a copy on my web page. What's really different between those servers? Well, not usually a whole lot. The host name might be different, the IP address might be different, but they've got the same operating system, they've got the same software loaded, they've got the same web pages. The majority of the data on their disks is identical. And so when VDP backs them up, it says, wait a minute, this is the same file on these 10 different servers. I'm going to just store it once. There's no sense in storing it a second time because it's the same file. So it deduplicates. It'll deduplicate between multiple backups of one VM, and it'll deduplicate across a single backup of many, many different VMs.
This sounds like some similar technology in certain systems. They use things like archive attributes and archive bits. If it's present, it means, hey, we don't have a copy of it. It's not there. We don't make one. Oh.
Yeah. Your first backup is going to be big, right? Because it's got to back up the whole hard drive. But your second backup is just getting what changed, and that's it. So the backups progressively get smaller. So if I'm backing up a 50 gig VMDK, I might need 50 gigs or even 100 gigs of space to store it and the changes that happen to it. But if I'm backing up a lot of virtual machines, you'll find that you need less and less space for each virtual machine you back up because of the deduplication. And then on top of that, there's compression, right? So it applies just regular zip type compression. I think it's actually gzip that it applies to compress that data and make it take less space. So between deduplication and compression, it really doesn't need a ton of space. But there is a maximum to it. VMware, they recommend that you don't have more than 8 terabytes of backups on a single VDP, because when it deduplicates, it's got to scan all that data to look for duplicates, right? It's got to index it, and it maintains a little database, and that database starts getting a little too big when you cross that 8 terabyte threshold. So when we start sizing this for our environment, you need to think 1 VDP server for every 400 virtual machines, and 1 VDP server for every 8 terabytes of data. If I've got 16 terabytes and 600 VMs, I'm going to need 2 VDP servers. But if I've got 100 VMs and 5 terabytes of data, 1 VDP server can knock that out no problem, and it'll work out great, right? So sizing it is not that hard of a thing to do.
Now, Don, you've mentioned hundreds of VMs, even 400, and we've talked in past episodes. You've told us that, there's always a manual approach to anything. Is this something that we have to do manually on 400 VMs, or can we make it a little bit easier? Is it something that, we can automate?
Oh, yeah, it's super simple. We're not in the program right now, but once you get the VDP fired up, it's an appliance, so deploying it's a snap. And once you deploy it, it integrates into your vSphere environment, right? So it ties into vSphere, and so it already sees all of your virtual machines. By accessing vCenter, it sees your VMs, it sees your data stores, it sees everything that's out there. And so we just have to schedule backup jobs. You check off some little boxes and say, I need to back up these 10 VMs and do it at 2 a.m. And you check it off and you set it to run. And you define a schedule. It runs the backups every day or every week or however often you want those backups to run. And that's it. It really is super easy to deploy. So why don't we see that? Why don't we see how it goes about deploying it? If you want to deploy VDP in your environment, the first thing you need to do is you need to get it, right? And we can get it from VMware. You can go and purchase it, or you can get a trial and download it. The appliance is the same. If you don't put a license key in it, though, it does time out. And what they're going to do is they're going to give it to you as an OVA. Okay, I know I said OVF earlier. When you get a template or an appliance, there's 2 different formats. There's the OVA or the OVF. The OVF stores the configuration in the hard drive separate, so you'll have multiple files. The OVA rolls it all together, all right? OVAs are really useful in VMware environments. OVFs work a little bit better if you're going to VirtualBox or Hyper-V or different platforms. So sometimes they're distributed 2 different ways. In this case, it's an OVA. So everything I need is right here in one file. I've got vSphere Data Protection 6.1.OVA. There have been several versions of VDP over the years. VDP version 6 is the newest one, or I guess 6.1 is actually the newest one, but 6.0 is kind of considered that newest generation, and they've added a lot of functionality to it that's really impressive. But the key thing to remember is that VDP 6 only works with ESXi and vCenter 6, so we need to be at version 6 across the board. If I still have ESXi 5.5 machines, or if I got vCenter 5.5, I need to go back to an older version of VDP 2. You want to try and keep those in line to make sure that everything works properly. All right, so when you've got that OVA, you need to import that into your vCenter environment. Now, if you've got the vCenter plugin installed, then what you can do is you can do it right through the vSphere web client. You log into the vSphere web client, you navigate to whatever data center it is that you're going to be deploying VDP into. So like I might navigate here to my data center. And when you right-click on the data center, you can choose to deploy an OVF template. And I know it says OVF, but it does OVFs and OVAs. It does either format, right? So I would choose to deploy the OVF template and browse and get it. Now, I run into this problem all the time. I've actually had it here in the show too, is that the vSphere web client plugin doesn't work so well under Chrome, and it works better under Internet Explorer, but I'm on a Mac, I don't have Internet Explorer, and so I can't really do that. So this type of deployment isn't going to work out for me. So what I normally do is have my vCenter server, because my vCenter server, it is running Windows, and instead of using the web browser, I can use the native vSphere client, and we can import it from there. All right. When we import it from here, it's just a little bit different. To import it, we use our File menu up top, and under the File menu, you'll see Deploy OVF Template. Okay, and so we can choose to deploy the OVF template, and we can browse and find that file. So I'm going to just browse, and we'll turn that file up real quick. And there it is, vSphere, or I don't want, yeah, that's what I want. vSphere data protection. So you're just going to browse and find that OVA and move forward. And the neat part about the OVA is, yes, it's an appliance, right? Yes, it's ready to be deployed, but there's things we're going to want to customize. Like I might want to have a specific IP address assigned to the machine or give it a specific name. And with a lot of appliances, when you deploy it, it'll have like a default IP. So then you got to log in and change it. Or it'll have a default password and you've got to log in and change it. And those are kind of annoying. Well, with an OVA like this, it actually has a little bit of a wizard that it uses where we can provide it the information necessary to get it customized to meet our needs. On the first screen here, it's just giving me a summary, and I'm getting an invalid certificate. This one is digitally signed by, not VMware, but EMC. EMC actually owns VMware, so it's really the same company, but this certificate is coming from EMC, and it's showing as invalid, and that probably either means it's expired, which I don't think it is, or it's issued from a provider that I'm not currently trusting, and that's more than likely the case. But I can see the size of it, and notice the size on disk. When I deploy this, it's only a 5.2 gig file, but it's got 2 virtual hard drives. One for the OS that's thin provisioned, that's 11 gigs in size, and one for the backups, which is 200 gigs in size, thick provisioned. So it's going to immediately consume 212 gigs of space on my system. I might want to increase this drive later on to store more backups. Remember I said we could store up to 8 terabytes of backups, so we can increase the size of that drive. But by default, I'm going to have 200 gigs. All right, on the next screen, we just have our license agreement, so we can accept that. We don't really have much of a choice. And then we start to get into our customizations, right? So on the next screen, it's going to ask me to name the system, and so I can give it a name. I can leave it with the default vSphere Data Protection 6.1, or maybe I want to call it VDP. I've actually already got a VDP server here, so I'll call this one VDP02. And then we can advance forward on that. And now it's going to ask me where I want to put it. And so you can place it on a data center or on a specific host if you want. My host 02 is turned off right now, so I'll pick a host that's turned on. And now the storage. That particular host has more than one data store, so I can pick which data store I want it to go in. So I'll pick my local data store. I could go into my iSCSI data store or wherever you get the best performance. Just remember, one of the drives is thick provisioned, so we're going to consume a lot of space when we deploy this. We just need to be ready for that. And that also means the deployment can take a little while. If it's got a thick provision 200 gigs of data, it's got to lay that out on the drive. If I go iSCSI, that'll be pretty slow. On a regular SAN or on my local storage, should be pretty quick. All right, then the disk format. Well, it's got a thick provision disk, and I can actually override that if I want. I can choose to make it thin provision, which is not necessarily the greatest idea, but I certainly can. And so it's recognizing that data store and showing the available space. I'm going to flip mine to thin. In production, you want to leave it to thick. I'm just doing that because I'm in a lab and I don't have a ton of space. All right, now the important screen. This screen is where I get to set the IP information. Instead of having a default IP, we can pick one, and that's important because the VDP is entirely web managed. We manage it from its web interface, and so I need an IP address that I can get to. If it was a default IP, I'd have to access the underlying OS and go and change it, and it's kind of a hassle, but here I can set it. So I can punch in the IP that I want to use as my default gateway. I can punch in my DNS servers and all the other things that I might need. And here's the IP address. So I'm just going to assign it an IP that's on my network and give it a subnet mask. All right. So once I've got that in place, now I've got an IP address that I know, so I'll be able to browse to the web page and actually work with the system. And now as I move forward, it just gives me a summary of everything that we did, and we can finish up. And it's going to deploy that OVF. Now, it can take a little while. It's got to copy the information. It's 5.5 gigs of data, right? It's got to copy that usually over the network. And then once it's in place, it's expanding that out to make it thick provisioned and all the other things. So this process could take a little while. So to save time, I've made a copy that I've already got, so I'm going to cancel this one.
Don, you talked about it being able to back up your virtual machines, but how about the physical environment? Is this just limited to the virtual machines only?
You can actually use it to back up physical machines too. It is just backup software. So it's going to deploy a little agent into your VMs and back them up. It can deploy the agent into a physical machine too. It can reach out to either of those. So I can use VDP not just to back up my VMware VMs, but I can use it to back up Hyper-V VMs or Zen VMs. I can back up physical servers, really the whole environment. You can do it right from here. It's a great product for that.
Now, as far as data storages, is this something that we're limited to on-premise data storages, or do we have other options?
They've actually extended this into a lot of, it almost sounds like a commercial now. Actually, Wes, now that you mention it, if you order now, you'll get 2 copies. It integrates with vCloud and the hybrid deployment, so you can back up multiple data centers. I know when I install it, I pick the data center for it to go in, but you can actually back up other data centers with it. You can back up you can really back up and integrate with pretty much everything except for vCenter. It's kind of weird. VDP can't back up vCenter. So you'll need something else to back up vCenter. Not a lot of critical data in vCenter anyway, so if you had to rebuild it from scratch, it's not a big deal. But that's kind of the one thing that it won't back up, and that's because it's integrated into vCenter, so it can't do that. But it can do backups of things like Microsoft SQL servers and Exchange servers that are notoriously difficult to back up. They've got agents for that. When we set up backups, it'll ask us what kind of backup we want to do. And you have what are called image level backups and guest level backups. An image level backup is where it freezes the virtual machine and makes a clone of that VM. So just the whole thing. And that's the backup I like. I like image level backups because they're so easy to restore. If I want to restore, it just restores the entire machine. I don't have to pick and choose files and run through a whole process. You just restore the image backup. They're fast, they get the whole thing, right? But the one thing an image backup isn't good at is making sure that the hard drive is clean when it backs it up. It freezes the hard drive as it is right then. And so if you have a database server like Microsoft SQL, it could be in the middle of writing data to the database and you freeze it. And so now your backup has an incomplete write. And if you restore it, it's missing half the data, you end up with corrupt data. So that's where a guest level backup is a little more useful, and that's where the backup occurs from inside of the guest itself. The guest is aware. It can stabilize its file system, it can do a clean backup, and since the guest is involved, this is what makes it where we can back up physical machines, right? Because the guest, it just treats it like a guest. We can't do an image level backup of a physical machine because it's not a VM that we can freeze. But we can do a guest level backup because the guest gets involved and moves that data along. So we'll see that choice when we go to configure it. All right, once you've deployed the template, the appliance, it powers on, and now what? Well, you actually don't do much from the device itself. Let me show you. So once it's deployed, we're ready to work with it, and you might be tempted to jump over to its console, but there's not really much we can do there. What we need to do is manage it via its web interface. It's kind of like ESXi, where you manage it from the web interface. So I'm going to jump over to my web browser, and what we need to do is log into the appliance. And the way you do that is you browse to the IP address of the appliance that we set as part of that wizard, and then it's running on port 8543. That's the default port for the VDP. So you're going to do https:// whatever the IP address is, :8543 / VDP-configure. That's going to take us to the configuration wizard where we can go and get the VDP set up. All right. Now, my screen wasn't displaying it because I clicked on it, but the first time you go to the console, it'll actually have a blue screen up and it'll tell you that address. So if you forget the port number, it'll show up. But if you click any button whatsoever, it drops you to a login prompt. And we don't actually have a valid login here that I can use. Well, we do have the root account that we're going to use right here. See how it's defaulting to a root account? And when I provided the IP address and stuff, it never did ask me for a password. So we have a default password we have to use to log in, which is actually change me by default. So I'm just going to punch in change me and hit login, and it's going to get me logged in to the VDP. Now, I'm not actually in the true VDP right now. I'm in the VDP setup wizard. I need to answer some more questions and get things set up to get it where we can start to use it. And so it's going to run me through that process, and it's pretty straightforward. Okay. The first thing it's going to bring up are the network settings, so I can change those IPs if I change my mind. I can give it a host name if I've got a host name for it. VDP does like DNS to work properly, but it's not overly sensitive about it, so I'm just going to leave those blank. And oh, it's not going to let me, shoot. So I will go ahead and give it a name in my environment. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and punch that in, and then see how it's complaining about that lookup? So it is being a little bit sensitive for me. It's trying to look that up and verify that the name resolves properly. So I need to get DNS set up to include that, so I can do that real fast. Let me just get into old DNS and register that name so that it'll be able to do the reverse lookup on it. VDP, it uses these names because it can back up systems that are in other data centers, so it's got to be able to reach out and find them. But at the end of the day, if you get through the wizard, it doesn't actually fail if the DNS information is not right. We're going to talk about vSphere replication in another episode, and you can't mess around with it. It's got to have DNS set up properly. Everything's got to be configured right for it. So some of them are more forgiving than others. This one is not. So I'm just going to register it with DNS, and it is .205. All right. So we'll get that one put in, and that should make it happy. So now when it goes to do a reverse lookup on its IP, it should be able to find it. There we go. All right, then I can pick my time zone. It's got us in Los Angeles. We are probably closer to New York than that, so I'll pick New York. And then my VDP credentials, okay? I logged in with a password of change me, right? So we need to put in a valid password here. That's something that only we know. So I'll put in a new password. And then my vCenter registration, right? VDP is going to integrate with vCenter, so it's got to be able to log in and connect to it. So I'm going to put in the credentials for vCenter so that it'll be able to access that. And I'm just using administrator at vSphere.local. If you've got single sign-on configured, you'll put in whatever username it is that you use to access the system. And so we can punch that in. I need to punch in my vCenter server. And you can use the IP or the name. If you use the name, it's usually better for certificates to do that. I'm going to leave verify vCenter certificate turned off. I'm using self-signed certificates right now. So if I turn that on, the certificate's going to fail and it won't work. So I need to leave that turned off. And we can test out that SSO authentication right here and make sure it's working. And it should come back and say that it was able to log in. Test completed successfully. All right, so now that we've got that, those were the hard things. After that, it becomes a little bit easier. We need to create storage for the backups to exist in, and then we can set up the rest of it. It's all pretty straightforward. All right, what it's doing right now, this one takes a moment. It's reaching out to vCenter, and it's saying, hi, I'm your new VDP server. Let me introduce myself. And so vCenter is updating to reflect that this exists. And that's important because one of the things it's doing is putting a plugin into the vSphere web client. So in the future, when I log into the vSphere web client, I'm going to see information about VDP integrated right there. So I can manage all of my backups right from the same screens where I back up my virtual machines. So that's what's happening. And as soon as that's done, there we go, we'll end up with our create storage. And so here's the options where we can come through and specify if we're creating new storage or if we're using existing storage. If I already had a VDP server and I'm moving it over here, I can do that. I'm going to create new storage. And I'm going to run a little tight on space. The lowest it's giving me here is 0.5 terabyte, so I should be able to handle that. So I'll pick it, but you can certainly go larger. Remember, we said that we kind of want to hold it to 8, and if I start bumping that up, 8's the max. I can't pick anything above that, but I'm going to go with 0.5. All right. Then we're going to get the VDP migration screen if we chose to migrate data. That means we've got an old VDP server we're replacing. It skips over it for me because I didn't choose that option. And now we have device allocation. So here it's got where it's going to store it. I'm low on hard drive space, so I'm going to change this to be thin provisioned. You don't want to do that. If you've got the right storage space, you want it thick provisioned because you get the best performance out of it. And you want your backups to go as quickly as possible. Network is normally your bottleneck. If you thin provision this, storage will be your bottleneck. So we usually don't want to do that. In a lab, it's okay, but otherwise. Also notice how by default, the backup data is stored with the appliance. So it'll be on the same data store. It doesn't have to be. You could have your backups on a completely different data store if you wanted, even a data store in a completely different building. That's great. If you want off-site backups, you could have VDP automatically backing up to an off-site location. Just make sure you got the bandwidth to handle that. All right. Then CPU and memory. Right now, my machine is set to have 4 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. Well, you can take that down a bit if you want. Actually, it's not letting me. You can edit the appliance and bump it down to 2 and it'll still work. The minimum requirement though, the recommendation is 4. And you can go higher if you've got them. In my system, I'm locked to 4, right? And then on the memory side, it's at 4 gigs. That's the recommended minimum. The target that they really shoot for is like 12 gigs of RAM is what they want. I don't have enough RAM to do it, so I'll leave mine at 4. All right, then if we want to join their customer experience improvement program, I'll pass on that. And that should be all it needs. The next thing it's got is to perform an analysis on the storage configuration. It wants to verify that the storage is set up properly and that it's ready to work. Notice it says it can take from 30 minutes to several hours. That basically means it will take at least 30 minutes to check the storage. Normally I would do this. And the reason is if you call VMware for support, it needs to have gone through the analysis, right? Otherwise they're going to make you do it before they'll help you. For the show, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip that little check, but normally we'd want to do that, right? And then it's got restart the appliances if successful. Before you start running backups, it needs to reboot the appliance one time. And so it can do that for us after this is done. So you could start this up and go home, and when you come in the morning, it'll be rebooted and ready to rock, all right? But I'll skip that for now, okay? It is telling me that it's ready to start, and this cannot be undone. The changes it's making, it can't undo them. If you made a mistake, it's usually easier to just delete the appliance and redeploy it again because we don't actually have any data in it just yet. Where that's really dangerous is if we were migrating other VDP storage in. That absolutely can't be undone. You have to do another migration to get it out. All right, so there it goes. It's starting up, and now I've got VDP. So once that's done, I'm ready to use it. Now, using it can go a few different ways. I can use it through the web interface of the VDP itself, or I can just use it right through the vSphere web client, and that's usually what we're going to do. In the vSphere web client, we're going to see a new menu item show up when it's done. So basically what will happen is if I go back to my home page, it may not be there yet, let's see. What you're going to see is over here on the left side, see how I've got like Hybrid Cloud Manager and vRealize Orchestrator? We're going to see the VMware data protection appear. It'll be a plugin that shows up here, all right? I need to wait for this to finish, and then even after that, a lot of times you have to log out and log back in before it actually shows up. So as soon as this is done, we'll give that a shot. There we go. It's going to reboot my appliance, and so we'll tell it to go ahead and restart, and that appliance is going to reboot in the background. And if I just watch that appliance, so here's the appliance, it's rebooting. It is just running Linux, and so the reboots actually happen pretty quick. So we'll give it a little bit of time, and it'll do its reboot. In the meantime, while I'm waiting on that, I'm going to go ahead and log out of the web client and log back in to see if that plugin shows up for me. So I'm logging out, and then we'll just log right back in so that we can see that show up. The nice part about this, really one of the big reasons we might use this over a third-party product, is that it is integrated right into the web client. So you run your VMs, you back up your VMs, you restore your VMs, all right from the same place. And because it's the web client, I don't need any software installed on my own machine. I just fire up a web browser and do it, and that's really, really useful. All right, it's going to churn a little bit slow on me here while it goes through all these changes. So as soon as that's done, though, we should see that plug-in, and we can reach out and grab it. And there it goes. And oh shoot, not seeing it yet. So once it reboots, it's going to register that plugin, and I'll just see it right over here. Sometimes I have seen this where the icon shows up here in the main area prior to showing up in the left side, but in my case, it's not showing up in either, so we're just going to kind of sit tight and wait on that to turn up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, thanks to the magic of television land here, we're going to jump forward in time, and remember, we're rebooting the VDP, waiting for it to come up, and when it comes up, it's registering with vCenter, so once that happens, we'll see it show up, and I sure enough see it now. So if I take a look at my vSphere web client, the two things that I'm looking for, on the left side here, we now have vSphere data protection showing up, right? That's really the thing that I was waiting on. But also way over here, I got a nice big VDP icon. They actually go to the exact same place. Doesn't matter which one I use, but they're there. That's what we were waiting to see. If you're not sure if it's actually done, the web page that we were on for VDP, if you just refresh it, you won't get the configure screen again. Instead, you'll get what's called a server health check, and it'll run down and show you all the services so that you know that they're started. If you don't have a green circle on one of these, then VDP is not working right, and it won't register, and it may not show up in vCenter. But it's an appliance, it's already configured, so it's not like there's something we could screw up here. It's just a matter of being patient, which we all know I'm terrible at. So at this point, VDP is up, it's connected into vCenter, and it's ready to be used. The only thing left is to actually use the thing. And how we use it is going to vary based on our organizational needs, right? So your company may use it different than my company versus Wes's company or whatever. So you just have to get in and customize it. Unfortunately, that's pretty easy. So I'm just going to drop right down here into vSphere data protection. And remember that we might have more than one VDP server, right? Because If you have more than 400 VMs or if you have more than 8 terabytes of data, you're going to need more than one VDP server. So the first thing it asks me is which VDP server I'm going to connect to. I've only got one. That makes life a little easy, and I'll get connected to it. So it's going to reach out, and what it's really doing on the back end is loading web pages from the VDP server and rendering them right here inside of vCenter. So technically, I'm now talking to 2 different servers at the same time, even though I see it all in one place. But from an administration standpoint, I just have one place to go. And we've got a nice little getting started page that we can run through where you can come through and create your backup job, verify your backups, and restore your backups just with a couple of basic clicks. But if you look at the tabs up here, you'll see where things are broken out a little differently. We have our backup and restore, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of time. Reports, that's one of the places I usually go to right off to make sure the backups have been occurring. And replication, haven't really talked about replication. If you have VDP in place, you can have a backup right here to this VDP server, and you can have another VDP server somewhere else, and you can replicate the backup over there. So if you want an off-site backup, you can set that up, but if you want to maintain an on-site copy too, so you can restore faster, then you can do that. You put 2 VDP servers out there, and you set up replication for it. But in my scenario, I just really need to get backups going. And right now, I don't have any backup jobs in place, so I need to get in there and create one. So if I go back to the Getting Started page here, I can choose to create a backup job, and we can walk through the wizard of getting that set up. Now, when I go to back it up, see how it's showing guest images and applications, all right? A guest image, that's where I'm taking an image of the virtual machine. I'm basically backing up the entire VM. But application, that's when I'm talking to an agent running inside of the guest, and that might be a VM or a physical machine. We talked about that earlier. So this could be if I'm backing up an Exchange server or SQL, and I want to actually get involved with the application. I'm just going to do a guest image in mine. And now it's going to ask, am I doing a full image of the VM, or do I want individual disks? If there's more than one hard drive in the VM, you don't have to back up the whole thing. Maybe it's got a data disk versus an OS disk, and I don't care about the OS, I just want to back up the data. I could certainly do that. I'm going to go ahead and back up the whole thing. And it does say fall back to the non-quiesced backup if quiescence fails. It's going to try and quiesce the disk. It's going to try and slow down disk writes so that we can get a good, clean backup of the disk. But if it can't, it'll just grab what it can grab. And that way we at least have something, even though we might have a few dirty writes in there. After that, the backup source. Who is it that I'm backing up? And so if we expand that out, we'll start to see our vCenter server, our data center, and the hosts and VMs inside of it. And I can pick individual VMs. I can pick entire host, entire data centers. I can back up the whole data center at 1 a.m. and it'll go up and back up every single one of those. I'm just going to back up my Windows client. Then, when do we want it to back up? Do I want this to be daily, weekly, the first Sunday of every month, or whatever we pick and choose? Maybe I want to go daily, and we'll say do a daily backup every day at 1 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so every day at 1 a.m. it's going to do a backup. We'll schedule that, and we don't have to worry about it. Then our retention policy. Now, retention policy is a little hard to calculate. Basically, I'm saying, how long do I want to save data for? And normally you want to save it as long as you can, because you just never know. Somebody's going to come to you and say, hey, Don, I deleted this file 2 months ago. Can you get it back for me? And usually I just say no, right? But if we have backups from 2 months ago and it's easy to get at them, then you can say, all right, yeah, let me go to backups. I'll pull that back. But the longer you retain data, the more storage you need. Thanks to deduplication, it's not that bad, right? As we make changes, that increases the size, but as long as it's the same data as other places, it's not a big deal. But if we have a lot of unique data, data retention can really eat up our storage pretty fast. So we probably don't want to go too far back. If you run out of space, your old backups start getting deleted to make room for new backups, and that may violate your backup policy depending on what your company's rules are.
Dawn, at this point, could you integrate the cloud functionality and storing the information in the cloud, or is this pretty much just going to be all local?
So it's got to be all local for this first backup, and then you can replicate out to the cloud, or you can back up straight to the cloud, but you can't really set up a hybrid piece right here. What I'd have to do is set up more than one backup job and kind of break it into pieces like that. It gets a little more complex, but trying to keep it simple, we'll just do the backup here, and maybe I'll set my retention down to 30 days because I only have 500 gigs of backup space, and so I don't want to go too crazy on it. All right, then I give the backup job a name. I'll call it my Windows client, or whatever name it is that you have for your backup. Maybe this is your Monday backup, and so you define it as such. and we go and finish it. Now, when I set this up, did it ever ask me if I wanted to do differential backups or all the different types? We have incrementals. You have what's the Tower of Hanoi and the grandfather method or whatever. Do you remember them all?
Yeah, grandfather, father, son, and the Tower of Hanoi. The GFS, I think, is the other one.
So there's a whole science to backups and all these different crazy terms. It never asked me any of that stuff, right? Because it does it automatically. It's going to do a full backup for the first one, and then it's just going to get a delta. It's going to get changes. It actually uses a snapshot system to be able to track those changes and pull them down. And it does it without me having to get involved. So it's just kind of automatic. And so when I finish that, it's now got the backup job set up, and at 1 a.m., it's going to back it up. Or if I wait patiently, I can go to the backup screen and I can force it to run right now, and it'll start backing up. Because the VMware tools are already installed in that virtual machine, it's got the information it needs to hook up with it. So I can see the backup job just finished creating. And if I jump over to my backup tab, there's my backup job windows. It's enabled. I've never run a backup, right? It's going to do an image-based backup the next time it runs, and the next run time is scheduled for 1 a.m. this morning. If we make this a really long show, we can wait and see that happen, or you can just highlight it and click backup now, and it's going to kick off that backup and start it running. All right. Once we've got a backup, doing a restore is just a matter of coming here to the restore tab and bringing it back. This really does function just like Backup Exec, ArcServe, all those other guys. It functions really the same way. The big advantage of this software, though, is that it's integrated right here into vCenter. We can manage our backups right in the same place that we manage our VMs. And if there's ever a problem, when you call up VMware for help, the same people that manage your infrastructure are managing your backups, so you get the help all from one place. So that really is the big selling point. There's not a crazy exciting feature here that makes it better than Backup Exec or better than ArcServe. It's just the integration, the ease of use. That's really the convenience factor. That's what makes this one a valuable product. All right, but now that that's done, yeah, that's pretty much all we need to see on VDP. On the exam, they want you to know how to set up VDP, which we saw was really easy, right? We import the template, we bring up the appliance, we assign it an IP, and then we wait for it to show up in vCenter. But I went a little bit further just to show how to kick off a backup here. So I just issued that backup command. It's going to start doing a backup here shortly. And in, I don't know, half an hour or so, that backup will be done, and I'll have my first backup of that VM, and I'm ready to rock. So it's churning along. Just remember, you do have additional configuration you can do in here to tweak it, get it set up. You'll want to monitor the backup storage, make sure you don't run out, and that you've got all of your resources taken care of. But other than that, that's basically VDP in a nutshell.
Well, Don, thank you for all that information on VDP, and I got to say that centralized management definitely comes in handy. It does look like we're coming to the end of another episode, but before we do, when it comes to the VDP and data protection, got any parting words of wisdom?
All right, remember your choices, right? We saw snapshots in the first recovery episode, then we saw VDP. I still have one more I want to talk about, which is vSphere replication. And I know what you're thinking is, I can do replication right here in VDP. Why do we have a separate replication product? They're different. All right. With VDP, we're replicating the backups, not the actual VM, but the backups. With vSphere replication, we can replicate the VMs themselves, so they're ready to launch. It's a different technology, and it's another option that's out there. So stay tuned for the replication episode, and then in your environment, pick and choose which ones you need to use. You may want to use all three, snapshots, VDP, and replication, and that gets you your perfect environment. Or you might just use one of them or two of them. You might integrate third-party products, but evaluate them all, figure out the ones that best meet your needs, and then those are the ones you want to deploy.
Well, Don, as always, thank you for being here in the studios, and thank you to the viewer watching. Remember, keep that data protected until we see you next time. I'm going to start over.
Keep the data protected until we see you next time. Then you don't have to protect your data anymore.
Then you're fine. When we see you next time, everything's going to go great.
Groovy.
All right.
Don't screw up.
All right, Don, thanks as always for being here in the studios, and thank you to the viewer watching. Remember, keep that data protected, and until we see you next time, signing out for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Wes Bryan.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
And we'll see you next time.